So, have you ever gotten a bad review? The kind that makes you want to crawl under a rock and never come out again? It's tough to hear that your work isn't perfect. But here's the thing. Criticism, even when it's hard to hear, is actually essential for growth, both personally and professionally. It can help us to identify areas where we need to improve, push us to be more creative, and even help us build stronger relationships. But not all criticism is created equal. Some criticism is constructive, offering helpful suggestions and insights. And then there's the other kind, the kind that just makes you feel bad. That kind of criticism, yeah, that's not helpful. That's what we call destructive criticism. So how can we tell the difference? And maybe more importantly, how can we learn to give and receive criticism in a way that's actually helpful? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today. So, let's start by talking about the difference between constructive and destructive criticism because, let's be honest, sometimes it's hard to tell. Constructive criticism is all about offering specific and actionable feedback in a way that's respectful and encouraging. It's about identifying areas for improvement while also acknowledging strengths. Think of it like this. Imagine you're a coach and you're working with an athlete who just lost a race. If you're being constructive, you're going to point out specific things that the athlete could have done differently, right? You might say something like, "Hey, I noticed that you started out too fast. Maybe try pacing yourself a little more next time." You're offering concrete advice, and you're doing it in a way that's supportive and encouraging. Destructive criticism, on the other hand, is all about tearing someone down. It's often vague, unhelpful, and focused on personal attacks rather than on the actual work or behavior that needs to be improved. Going back to our coach analogy, imagine that instead of offering specific advice, the coach just yelled at the athlete for losing. Or maybe they made fun of the athlete's performance in front of the whole team. That's destructive criticism. It's not helpful, and it's only going to make the athlete feel bad about themselves. So, how can you tell the difference between constructive and destructive criticism? Well, one way is to pay attention to the language that's being used. Constructive criticism often uses I statements and focuses on specific behaviors or actions. For example, instead of saying, "You always interrupt me," you might say, "I feel like I don't get a chance to finish my thoughts when I'm talking to you." See the difference? One is an attack, and the other is an observation followed by a feeling. Another way to tell the difference is to pay attention to the intent behind the criticism. Is the person offering the criticism trying to help you improve, or are they just trying to make you feel bad? Sometimes it's hard to tell, especially if we're feeling defensive. But it's important to try to step back and really consider the other person's perspective. It's also important to remember that everyone makes mistakes. We all say and do things that we regret, and sometimes those mistakes hurt other people. If someone is criticizing you, it might be because they were hurt by something you did or said. Now that doesn't mean that their criticism is necessarily valid or helpful, but it does mean that it's coming from a place of pain. And sometimes, understanding where someone is coming from can make it easier to hear what they have to say. Of course, sometimes people are just mean, and if you're on the receiving end of that kind of criticism, the best thing you can do is to just walk away. But if someone is offering you criticism with good intentions, even if it's not delivered in the most perfect way, it's important to try to be open to what they have to say. Giving constructive criticism is a skill, and like any skill, it takes practice. But there are a few things you can do to make sure that your criticism is more likely to be heard and less likely to be met with defensiveness. First, always start by asking permission. Don't just launch into a critique of someone's work or behavior without first checking to see if they're even open to hearing it. You can say something like, "Hey, would you be open to hearing some feedback on that presentation?" Or, "I have some thoughts about how we could improve our communication. Would you be open to me sharing them with you?" Second, be specific. Don't just say, "I didn't like that." Instead, explain what you didn't like and why. For example, you could say, "I felt like the presentation was a little too long. I think it would have been more engaging if it had been about 10 minutes shorter." Third, focus on the behavior or the work, not the person. Don't say "you're always so disorganized." Instead, say, "I noticed that the deadline for that project was missed. Is there anything I can do to help you stay on track next time?" Fourth, be timely. Don't wait weeks or months to give someone feedback on something. The sooner you can give them the feedback, the more likely they are to remember the situation and be able to do something about it. Fifth, be mindful of your tone. Even if you're offering constructive criticism, it's important to be aware of your tone of voice and body language. Make eye contact, keep your voice calm and even, and avoid using accusatory language. And finally, be sure to end on a positive note. Let the person know that you believe in them and that you're confident that they can improve. Constructive criticism is about helping others grow, not tearing them down. So practice these tips, and you'll be on your way to giving feedback that truly makes a difference. Let's be real, nobody actually enjoys being criticized. It's natural to feel defensive when we feel like we're being attacked, but learning to receive criticism gracefully is an essential part of growth, both personally and professionally. So how can we do that? First, remember that criticism is not always a bad thing. In fact, it can be incredibly valuable. It can help us to see our blind spots, to identify areas where we need to improve, and to become more successful in all areas of our lives. Second, try to listen without interrupting. I know it's hard, especially when we feel like we're being attacked. But it's important to try to really hear what the other person is saying, even if we don't agree with them. Third, ask clarifying questions. If you're not sure you understand what the other person is saying, ask them to explain it in a different way, or ask for specific examples. Fourth, acknowledge the other person's feelings. Even if you don't agree with the criticism, it's important to acknowledge that the other person is entitled to their feelings. You can say something like, "I hear that you're frustrated with how I handled that situation." Fifth, don't take it personally. This one is hard, but it's so important. Remember that criticism is about your behavior or your work, not about you as a person. Sixth, try to find the kernel of truth. Even if the criticism is not delivered in the most helpful way, there's often a grain of truth in there somewhere. Try to find it. Seventh, thank the person for their feedback. Even if you don't agree with the criticism, thank the person for taking the time to give it to you. Let them know that you appreciate their honesty and that you'll take their feedback into consideration. And finally, remember that you don't have to take everyone's advice. Just because someone criticizes you doesn't mean that you have to change your behavior or your work. You get to decide what feedback you want to take and what feedback you want to leave behind. Learning to receive criticism gracefully is a journey, but it's one that's well worth taking. So, we've talked about the difference between constructive and destructive criticism. We've talked about the importance of intent. We've talked about how to give and receive criticism in a way that's healthy and productive. But why bother? Why put in all this effort? What are the benefits of embracing criticism? Well, first and foremost, embracing criticism can help us to grow as individuals. When we're open to feedback, we're more likely to identify our blind spots, to learn from our mistakes, and to become the best versions of ourselves. Second, embracing criticism can help us to improve our relationships. When we're able to give and receive criticism constructively, we're better able to communicate our needs and expectations, to resolve conflict effectively, and to build stronger, healthier relationships. Third, embracing criticism can help us to be more successful in our careers. In the workplace, feedback is essential for growth and development. When we're open to feedback from our bosses, our colleagues, and even our clients, we're more likely to identify areas where we can improve our skills, our performance, and ultimately our careers. Fourth, embracing criticism can help us to be more creative. When we're not afraid of feedback, we're more likely to take risks, to experiment, and to come up with new and innovative ideas. Fifth, embracing criticism can help us to be more resilient. Let's face it, life is full of setbacks and disappointments. We're all going to face criticism at some point in our lives. But when we learn to embrace criticism, we develop a thicker skin. We learn to bounce back from adversity. We learn that it's okay to make mistakes as long as we're willing to learn from them. So, yeah, embracing criticism can be tough, but it's also incredibly rewarding. So there you have it, folks. The art of criticism in a nutshell. Remember, criticism, when given and received constructively, can be a powerful tool for growth and improvement. It's about fostering a mindset of continuous learning and development, both for ourselves and for those around us. So, the next time you're faced with the opportunity to give or receive criticism, remember the tips we've discussed today. Be kind, be specific, be open-minded, and most importantly, be willing to learn and grow. Now, I want to hear from you. Share your experiences with criticism in the comments below. Have you ever received criticism that helped you grow? Or maybe you have a story about giving criticism that was well received? Let's continue the conversation down there. And as always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and DFTBA.